Join Edwin Frondozo on the Business Leadership Podcast every week for a unique program featuring insights and actionable items from the world's most successful business leaders. Hear firsthand the exclusive interviews and personal journeys on how today's transformational leaders made it to the top.
I think leadership styles need to be somewhat catered to whomever you're working with. That good leaders need to be able to adapt to meet people's different needs. But I would say that as a general rule, I see my role as giving my team the space and autonomy that they need to do their best work, but still being there for them to support, to help answer questions, to ask them perhaps more thought-provoking questions, or even just to work together to jam on something.
This is the Business Leadership Podcast, and I'm your host, Edwin Frondozo. Welcome. Thank you for taking your time to join me on another episode of the Business Leadership Podcast. I really appreciate your time, and I truly enjoy sharing my conversations as I am always learning something new from these amazing business leaders and entrepreneurs that I have the opportunity to sit with. Today, I'm excited to share the conversation I had with Alyson Gausby. She is the head of research at Twitter Canada. She's responsible for translating consumer intelligence and data into learnings that are not only insightful for brands, but also speak to the future of Canada's ever-evolving digital ecosystem. In our conversation, we discuss how brands are connecting to culture in 2019. We talk about how social media has greatly changed the landscape of business and markets in the past year, specifically how customers are directly interacting with brands through social media. This conversation is so important for the business leaders who are leading companies and trying to maintain a conversation with their customers through social media. Lastly, Alyson talks about the impact of the culture and brands. She really shares the similarities and differences through different markets like Canada, US, United Kingdom, and Brazil. Today's episode is sponsored by True Shield Insurance. As a proud supporter of Canadian startups and entrepreneurs, True Shield offers solutions that help protect from the risks you may face today, tomorrow, or down the road. True Shield, no small business. Learn more at trueshield.ca. And with that, here we go. Welcome to the Business Leadership Podcast, Alyson.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am super excited to have you here to talk about not only your business leadership and your history, Alyson, but I know you've been working on a couple of things that we'll get into as well. That's pretty exciting for me in terms of the work that I do and being within social media and talking with leaders. So, I mean, I'm not going to get too ahead. Let's stop right there, Edwin. Yeah. I guess, Alyson, the best way to do this is if we could start off by introducing yourself to our listeners. Maybe tell us who you are and what you like to do when you're not leading or growing businesses.
Sure. Well, I'm Alyson Gausby. I'm from Toronto, born and raised with some stints working abroad in the UK and the US. I studied business and fine arts in university, which admittedly is a bit of a strange left brain, right brain combo, but there you are. I'd say that I'm a self-proclaimed data nerd. I've been working in tech and research for probably more years than I care to admit, and have been the head of research and analytics at Twitter Canada for the past 3. I'd say that I'm a naturally curious person, which is probably why I became a researcher to begin with. So when I'm not in the office, I'm probably heading off to explore new places and cuisines. I love to travel, try new restaurants, or cook up a storm, although I think that's mainly because I like to eat. So, if you ever need any travel or restaurant recommendations, let me know. And I also love to check out live music, particularly music festivals. So, to give you an example, I spent my last birthday in Paris at Pitchfork Festival, listening to one of my favorite artists called Yellow Days.
Wow, that sounds like you're running a full life there, Alyson. So I'm really intrigued, and for a self-proclaimed data geek, you definitely get outside. You definitely get outside of your house a lot there. so that's
maybe that's the left brain, right brain dynamic at play.
Yeah, 100%. So, from my understanding, and you just quickly mentioned it, Alyson, I think you're the head of research at Twitter Canada. Can you share with us, like, what does that mean? What does that role entail? Your responsibilities, and just for fun, if you can, what are you trying to accomplish within this role over the next little while?
Sure. Well, my team's mandate is to prove and improve the impact of advertising on Twitter. So that means a few different things. We measure the effectiveness of campaigns and also do research on our research to create best practices, guidelines, help our clients to understand what works best on the platform. As you can imagine, we have a lot of data. I like to think of Twitter as kind of being the world's largest focus group. So we do a lot of work to help our clients better understand and tap into different audiences and conversations on the platform as well. And we also do quarterly releases of thought leadership research, which lately has been focused on to digging into culture and conversation. So for culture, it's about understanding cultural relevance. How do we define it? What are people's perceptions? What does it ultimately mean for brands and their bottom lines? And conversation has been an area of more focus for us as of late. Our mission as a company is to serve the public conversation. So we are looking to better understand how we can drive conversations, what healthy brand conversations look like on Twitter, why does that matter, and ultimately, how and when should brands activate on the platform in order to drive those healthier conversations and help them build their brands.
Oh, I mean, it's really cool. And what's interesting to me and what you're saying, Alyson, a lot of the work and a lot of the research that is being conducted by you and the team is it primarily to impact brands, companies? And the reason I asked you before I let you go is I feel like I'm a brand. Like, would I gain some insight from this type of studies that you're working on?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're right. Our main stakeholders, our main audience are marketers and advertisers. So I'm essentially market research to marketers. But that doesn't mean that, these findings are only relevant to a big national brand, for example. I think that most of our research is rooted in consumer behavior and consumer insights, which are, translatable into insights for a lot of different folks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's really interesting, and trying to be a thought leader, or being a thought leader, I guess, within space and the medium being social media and podcast is sent out under a number of platforms. It's always interesting with this ever changing, I guess, mediums, and Twitter's been there since day one, but it's always, it's part of my job to always understand where should I be focusing my work, and maybe we'll get into that as well. And I know because the work you're doing is primarily for brands and for maybe a lot of the business leaders that are listening today as they sit in the office and wonder, whether they should be tweeting back at every person who is talking to them on social media, right?
Even for you, looking at what people are talking about, how they're talking about it, what conversations and what topics are emerging, what's starting to trend, even information like that could help inform, what your focus is for, your next episode or, what you start to, if you start to pivot and look at, new topic areas or whatever next month.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, it's, as I think about things that I'm working on, and I'm working on, I guess, a new show hasn't been announced, but it's a collaboration, and it will be on like trending type technologies and innovation. So it's just like, how do we really come out with proper content so the conversations are created and impact is made as well, right? I mean, for me, being a startup entrepreneur and a podcast host, I'm all about get going and then improve. But I mean, it's always,
iterate, right?
Yeah, iterate. But working with and talking with very accomplished business leaders, it's always, what tools do we have, in our bucket to ensure that we're going to market at the best. So I mean, this is an amazing conversation. I just we really want to like dig in, because as we talk about research, I know there was one specific one that you worked on recently, and I wanted to dive in because it's something that's happening a lot with a lot of movements that's happening in the world. But there was a study, and you correct me wrong, it was about the impact of culture. So before we really dive in there, can you talk about what that research was and maybe why you initiated that study?
Sure. So it was a new piece of thought leadership research that we just recently released. And it stemmed from us seeing more and more brands becoming involved in culture in different ways. So whether that's through events like the Super Bowl or National Puppy Day, trends like the bottle cap challenge or cauliflower crusts, or issues and movements, climate change, gender equality, etc. So we wanted to better understand that whole concept of culture, how people define culture, dig into some of the different elements that they're most passionate about, but also understand if and how they think brands should be involved, and some of the ways that brands should be more involved with culture. And then, of course, we also look at the impact of doing so and come up with guidelines or suggestions for how brands should go about it and activate tapping into culture, but doing it in an authentic way.
I mean, it's interesting, and like I mentioned, even with culture, and this is fairly new, and this will probably air in a couple of weeks, but here up in Canada, there was a culture of tennis that just took over Twitter in the last couple of days because a fellow Canadian, she the North hashtag won the U.S. Open, right? Is that something that your study, your research looked into? Because that is a culture of sports, right? I mean, even the Toronto Raptors, because we're both sitting in Toronto, basketball took Canada by storm, which is another culture thing. And I'm sure being in Toronto, and you probably saw this a lot, both of us together, was seeing a lot of brands jump onto the Raptors bandwagon. Like, is this something that you saw in your research as well?
Yeah, I mean, our research was largely done before the Raptors, but sports plays heavily. When we look at how people define culture, we saw that, it's not just some of the more traditional elements that may come to mind first. So, it is, but is not isolated to your heritage or the language you speak at home or your religion. It's very much about pop culture as well. So what you're listening to, what you're watching, what's going on in sports, what's going on in politics, etc. So, I mean, culture from a Canadian perspective is quite broad. But absolutely, I mean, sports and Twitter are just, I think, a natural combination. And yes, we absolutely saw things blow up, both from like an organic standpoint, but also a lot of brands becoming part of the conversation, becoming part of the hype and the celebration around these key moments in our culture.
No, that's really important. Quickly, what was the most surprising thing that you found out from this research you did on culture?
I think it was being able to prove that being seen as culturally relevant, or a brand being seen as more culturally relevant, actually drives purchase decisions, and that it's correlated with better overall brand health. So it does impact a brand's bottom line at the end of the day, and that you don't necessarily have to be one of the world's sexiest brands. You don't have to be, a Nike to be a part of what's happening and to benefit from doing so.
Oh, I mean, amazing. Because that's, I guess, for every marketer or communications leader is like, do we jump on to what's trending, right? And from what you're saying is, as long as it aligns up to your, I guess, vision and your mission or your core competencies, then really the answer should be yes.
Yeah, and that really is the key thing is doing it in a way that makes sense for your brand, that's in line with your overall message and voice, and so is seen as authentic.
No, that's great. Is there anything else that maybe one key takeaway when it comes to this study? And Alyson, this study, it's available to everyone, right?
Yes, it is.
And so, we'll post a link on we'll post the link on the episode for those who are really interested in terms of this research around culture and stuff. But before I move on, I want to say, like, what's the one key takeaway for those who are listening now and really interested in maybe just as like, I really needed to hear that.
Yeah. Well, what I found really interesting, so we actually did this study in Canada, the US, the UK, and Brazil. So what I think is really interesting is looking at similarities and differences across markets. So a lot of our analysis has been focused on comparisons with the US. And we see that the results are very consistent across markets, particularly between Canada and the US. But one of the main differentiators, one of the areas that we did see a big difference was when we were digging into how brands should go about being more culturally relevant. And one thing that really popped for Canadians was being more inclusive of all types of people, which probably isn't too much of a surprise. Living in Canada, you hear a lot of talk about diversity really being one of our strengths and something that we hold central to Canadian values. But it was interesting to see such a big difference, and that there was more of an appetite in Canada, that people think that brands can become more culturally relevant just by being more inclusive.
Well, that's amazing. Well, thank you for putting that together. Excited to share that with everyone who is listening and to my community as well. Because when I went over that study, and I mean, it's really interesting, and sometimes it just put things into perspective in some of the stuff that I'm thinking as a Canadian and also a business leader as well. I wanted to change gears a little, Alyson, and quickly talk about some of your experiences and your journeys when it comes to, your career as you've grown in terms of business leadership. And you mentioned you've worked in the UK, you worked for a number of global organizations like Microsoft, AOL, Ipsos Reid. So I'd love to ask my guests if they could share a really difficult situation that they had to make a decision on when it comes to their career or leadership or management that really allowed you, as you made that decision, allowed you to grow significantly as a business leader.
Yeah. I mean, I've moved around a fair bit in my career, sometimes taking jobs that maybe seemed like I was biting off a bit more than I could chew, or that I was honestly actually kind of surprised that I was offered. mean, maybe that's a bit of imposter syndrome coming out. But
Right.
to give you an example, I, for most of my life, had a phobia of public speaking, and I would avoid it at any cost. But I started thinking, and I realized that it was a skill that I would need more and more as I progressed in my career, no matter where I ended up at the end of the day. So I decided to throw myself in the deep end, basically, and I took a role at Microsoft leading consumer insights for the Canadian market. And for that job, about a quarter of my role was speaking at conferences. So I guess you can kind of call that trial by fire.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. The process wasn't that much fun. There were a lot of things. But in the end, I walked out of that experience feeling like I could literally do anything if I set my mind to it. And I think that's sort of stuck with me over the years.
Small business owners, True Shield can prepare you for the unexpected with the right insurance coverage. For example, phishing is a cybercrime that tricks you into revealing sensitive information. Phishing occurs as a phone call, text message, or email, and small businesses are the target for over half of all email scammers. The result can be damage to your reputation, data leaks, legal trouble, and financial loss. True Shield Cyber Risk Insurance helps protect your small business from certain financial losses, so phishing won't affect your bottom line. Learn more about cyber risk insurance today online at trueshield.ca. I mean, that's really interesting because a lot of our listeners are maybe thinking about taking a role that scares the living S out of them.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that in terms of like maybe how long it took you to first off make the decision to accept that role. And then as you were in the role, new to the role, whatever, if it was your first 90 days or first half year, as you prepared for those first keynotes or first public speaking events.
Yeah, I hummed and hawed over it a little bit, but it didn't take me too long. I just decided that I'd better accept it before I changed my mind.
So quickly is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. It's like just put yourself on the roller coaster, then you can't get off. And I took a presentation skills course at U of T. So that I felt like I was doing something, and that I feel like one gave me more experience doing it, but two also gave me some little tips and tricks, things to watch out for, which just made me feel a little bit better, more confident. And I remember watching a TEDx video about power positions. And so I remember, I would be at a conference, and right before I would get on stage, I would just like go in the bathroom and do a power stance. And I don't know whether or not it ever helped, but I felt like at least I was doing something.
Well, but let me just say, doing those power stances, I don't know if it helps at all, but I think it helps in the sense that you're telling yourself you're doing a power stance and that you feel silly doing it. And whether maybe this is just me, but you do a power stance, it's like, oh, I feel good, I did that, and no one's watching, right? But so it probably does. There is probably a science to it, and I'm sure you watch some for those. There's a TEDx on this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that you question if it works, but you do it anyways.
Yeah, and I think if you flex that muscle enough, and you're constantly putting yourself in those types of positions, that you just kind of get comfortable being uncomfortable at a certain point. And that means that you raise your hands for new initiatives, even if they're really terrifying. And I think, that just shows like a desire to want to keep learning and
right.
and growing.
Okay. No, I mean, and as business leaders, as managers, we're always looking and learning how to improve, right?
Mhm.
Because being a manager, being a leader, we're working with people all the time, and no one's the same. So I'd love it to get your thoughts and maybe reflection on, where you are now, Alyson, when it comes to management, your management style, your leadership style, and how it's evolving and which way you're looking towards improving now.
Yeah. To your point, everybody's different. So I think leadership styles need to be somewhat catered to whomever you're working with. That good leaders need to be able to adapt to meet people's different
Hmm.
needs. But I would say that as a general rule, I see my role as giving my team the space and autonomy that they need to do their best work, but still being there for them to support, to help answer questions, to ask them perhaps more thought-provoking questions, or even just to work together to jam on something. And then, of course, also being their champion. So, help them get to where they want to be, and also make sure that I give them visibility both internally and then also within the industry. And I think that approach probably stems from a few things. So first of all, it's how I feel that I do my best work. When I have
Hmm.
support and guidance, but still a sense of freedom to be more creative in how I decide to tackle a problem or a question. Um, and then the other thing is that, I mean, if I'm honest, I just don't have time to micromanage anyone. So when when I'm
Yeah.
hiring, I'm looking for self starters, somebody who is curious and hungry.
Yeah, no, 100%. Actually, as you talk about being a self-starter, and this is just coinciding with, I guess, a campaign I've been contributing on
Mhm.
LinkedIn, and it's basically talking about hiring. And when you look to hire a team member, talk to me about what you found is best for you. Are you fully fine? Because within your role, I'm sure you need someone with the experience and the skill
Mhm.
set. But if you have someone with the same skill set, like how are you making these decisions now?
Well, I think there are certain things that you can teach, and there are certain things that that perhaps aren't as easy to teach. Um, if I'm entirely honest, my interview style, um, I like to leave the bulk of time for a candidate to ask me questions, because I think that it's a little bit more telling about the things that are important to them, what they want to be able to, what they want to better understand, but also just where the conversation goes from those questions. So are they able to um, understand what I'm saying, and sort of pivot from that, or dig in even deeper.
Yeah, no, 100%. And something that you get better at as you go through the motions of
Mhm.
hiring, and it'd be different from your first hire to your 20th
Sure.
hire. Um, One thing that you mentioned in terms of your leadership style and giving space to your team members, and also being there so they could grow and be successful as well. I'm wondering if there's anyone in your life, in your career, that maybe really stands
Mm.
out to someone who helped you grow as a business leader. It could be a mentor, a manager, it could be even someone you didn't work with. Who comes to mind when I say that?
I've been very fortunate in my career to work both with and for some really amazing people. Um, One of the people who first comes to mind is named Paul Netto, and he was one of the co-founders at a startup that I used to work for many moons ago. Um,
Hmm.
and I think it's the same at any startup where you're basically overqualified or underqualified for everything that you're doing, right? So you're making the coffee, but also, we were creating and marketing new products. And as you can imagine, if you're the new kid on the team, and you're still sort of wet behind the ears. It can be hard to make big decisions, but Paul was great at empowering everyone on the team. So to him, the only wrong decision that you could make was not making one at all. So we made decisions based on whatever information that we had available. And we knew that no matter how things turned out in the end, no one would ever fault you as long as you could justify why you had made the decision that you did. And I think that's something that's stuck with me as well.
Well, I love that. Like, how does it? Can you say that again? What he said?
The only wrong decision that you can make is not making one at all. So
the only wrong decision you could make is not making one at all.
So make a call and let's roll with it, rather than humming and hawing and not being able to ship anything.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's a great comment, and I think about times in my career when you think, okay, I'll just make a decision later because it's not essential. But that, in an essence, what you're saying and what Paul was saying is like that's a bad decision. So if you're listening and you're holding out on making a decision, that's probably a bad decision. You got to move forward with whatever information you have. And sometimes what I tell people, Alyson, and maybe you could relate now, is like sometimes you got to go with the gut too, right? And go from there.
Yeah, you work with whatever information is available.
Fun question, Alyson. If I were to ask any of your team members, could be past, present, colleagues, what's the best leadership quality that you possess? What do you think they would say?
So you call this a fun question. I think this is a tough one. I think it's. I think
it's fun. It's fun for me.
I think it's kind of hard to gauge how other people really see you.
What do you hope? What do you hope? I guess then.
Well, hang on a sec. I was asked a question on a panel a little while ago, and so I did basically what I do for a living, and I surveyed some of my coworkers. I polled a few people who I work with really closely to ask them that, and they said that it was my ability to cut through clutter, to essentially distill complex ideas into something that's clear and simple and easy to understand. Because when you think about it, research methodologies, they can get pretty complex. And I am, marketing research to marketers. So things need to be very clear and action oriented. And I think that's a skill that I've been able to hone over the past few years.
No, and that's amazing because it's a testament in terms of who you are and as you've grown into a business leader, because having that amount of data and really taking it to digestible information is not easy. And I know this because I have a computer engineering degree as well, and I've been similarly, although I haven't practiced it in a while, is like I'm able to take complex ideas and put it in analogies and stuff like that. So that's amazing, and congratulations on that. Alyson, I'd like to ask you, and I know you mentioned there was other studies that you're working on, but like what else is going on? Anything new or any initiatives that you're super excited about? And maybe you could share with us today.
Well, as you can imagine, there is never a dull moment at Twitter. There's always something happening. But at the moment, we are focused on building tools to better understand audiences and conversations to essentially allow us to more efficiently tap into the plethora of data that we have, and then using those tools again to surface those actionable insights. We have a new project with one of our clients where we're basically helping their internal creative studio by surfacing real-time insights that they are then building creative and even overall marketing strategy based on. So that's really exciting. And I'm also working.
So that's like real time marketing initiatives without wait. Like you're right on there. If someone says something, literally, depending on how you turn it around, like these marketers, your clients could be in the moment.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. We're just kicking that off. So that's really exciting. And I'm also working on a new global initiative where we're developing a narrative, a playbook, and different types of product packaging to help our clients better connect with key events and occasions. So that's a cross-functional global initiative, which has been, really interesting. Just getting a better sense of, the how all of the pieces of the organization fit together and today, and a better sense of what we can accomplish if we are all working towards the same goal. So it's been a really great experience.
No, that's amazing, and I'm definitely want to get all the research that you get, and we could share it all the time. But super exciting, really happy that you joined us, Alyson. But before I let you go, can you share with us maybe a final thought, observation? Ideally, I'd like to share actionable items for the business leader who is listening today.
Okay, I've got two for you.
I like that.
Yes. The first is to ask questions. You and I both ask questions for a living, so I'm sure that you can appreciate this. Asking questions isn't something that we're necessarily taught how to do well, and I think a lot of people have this sort of preconceived notion that asking a question isn't a good thing. But I think it is actually a sign of intelligence. I think it shows a desire to learn, and by asking questions, you're making yourself better, but also potentially making others better as well, challenging them or providing your unique perspective, which perhaps they haven't thought about before. And the second is honestly follow people from your industry on Twitter. See what they're talking about, when they're talking about it, and how they're talking about it, and engage with them, because Twitter gives you unparalleled access to people who you wouldn't normally have access to in real life. So, of course, politicians, celebrities, athletes, but that also means CEOs and industry leaders as well. And Twitter is also where news happens first, where it breaks first. So it helps you keep up to date with what's happening and be up to date with the latest and greatest, and have an opinion on it as well.
No, that's great. I mean, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, asking questions and following Edwin on Twitter. Exactly. No, I'm just kidding. That was amazing. Alyson, this was an amazing conversation. I really do appreciate your time and stopping in to join us today. Again, thank you for joining us on the Business Leadership Podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's it, biz leaders. Thank you once again for joining me on another episode of the Business Leadership Podcast. This was episode 128 with Alyson Gausby. If you want to learn more about Alyson, Twitter Canada, or a link to the research that we discussed, go to thebusinessleadership.com/128. Join me on my private Facebook group where I will discuss this episode, answer your questions, and connect you with other like-minded business leaders. Simply search for the Business Leadership Group directly in Facebook. Once again, thank you to today's sponsor, True Shield Insurance, Canada's most trusted insurer for entrepreneurs and small businesses. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe, rate, and leave a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening today. Thank you again. Edwin, signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Business Leadership Podcast at thebusinessleadership.com.